Good day to you. If you were to take a walk outside of your door right now and take a look at your street and take a look at each and every individual house and or apartment on that street, how many houses and apartments would contain somebody you would call a friend? Think about that for a moment, because to live in close proximity to other people does not necessarily make them friends, which then builds into what we consider a community. And that is in fact our subject of discussion for today. It's about the internet and social media and building community. And that's actually one of the first things that the chapter addresses is, in today's day and age, that social media gives us greater chances for community that otherwise would not be there. As in the example that I gave a moment ago, how many friends do you have living on your street? It takes a while to build friends, and it takes a while to build a community. You need to have experiences with each other, like having to shovel each other's driveways, or deciding to help each other shovel each other's driveways, or borrowing a cup of flour, or asking the neighbor across the street if they know what's the matter with the electricity being out. These things over and over again start to build community. And so that's what this chapter discusses. It discusses the role of social media in building community. And it makes the interesting point, I think, that the whole reason we can have something we consider to be a community on social media is because of something the book calls interpersonal democratization. Interpersonal democratization is the idea that you get to choose in today's day and age who you want to have a relationship with much more than in the past, for most of the reasons that we've already talked about in this class, that the possibilities are infinite once you get on the internet and social media. So democratizing interpersonal relationships has led to much more commingling amongst people of similar interests. And that's what it takes to build a community. It takes similar interests. Sometimes those interests are born out of where you live, as in everybody who lives on a street, I would think, wants to be free from crime. You want to feel safe. And so that is an interest that would naturally build the people on the same street as having a community. But there are other features that go along with being in a community, such as reciprocity. You do something for somebody and you expect at some point that they will do something for you. And the examples I gave before earlier, you borrow a cup of flour or an egg or some milk, and then you expect the same, that you can deliver something to that person in some way. That's a reciprocity. Also, you have kin. Kin is a basis for community as well. Now, kin is not family. Kin is people who are like you, like-minded. They are like your family. They can be your family, but it's more important that they exhibit the traits that your family has about it that most people seem to like. It could be something as simple as football teams that people in your family like, to meals that are served, to ways that religion is practiced, to ideas about life and death. Kin is also something that's the basis of a community. And then finally, there are specified boundaries. Specified boundaries, you have those with your neighbors outside. You wouldn't walk outside and let your dog go to the bathroom on somebody's front lawn. That's a specified boundary with who you live in. And we have the same kinds of things going on in a community, which is built out of, again, reciprocity, kinship, and specific boundaries. Now, the book makes the claim again that there is a clear link between offline and online relationships, that many relationships have both dimensions to them. There's this online part where you only say certain things and only communicate in certain ways using social media. And then there's your offline relationship, how you are when you're in person. Sometimes the contrast between those can seem bizarre. Like a person is really communicative online. They really are a prolific texter. They really post a lot on whatever social media platform. But in person, they're very, very shut down. We can see that. But the book nonetheless claims that there is a clear link between those two categories of people. Now, there's something that's raised in this chapter as a term that we may consider replacing community with. If we want to think about a community as having to have that kinship and having to have reciprocity and and specified boundaries, is it really possible online, or are we talking about something different? And that's where the book comes up with a term called a personal network. A personal network is where you establish the kinds of people that you want to communicate with on your social media platform. And that includes everything from declining friendships, to blocking certain messages, to not responding to certain messages, to accepting friendship requests. It's that very personal group of people that you have decided that you're going to be in touch with through all the mechanisms that you have on social media. That is a personal network. It's a network of people, but it's very personal to your own decisions and relationships. Is that really a term the book raises that we want to think about replacing community with? Because can a community be possible online? One of the most important terms in this chapter is the term social capital. Social capital is an interesting term. The book seems to be indecisive about it in and of itself, but it's basically the idea that by spending time in your community, participating in a neighborhood watch, going to musical groups that your borough council brings in, picking up trash that is not always just on your property, going around Christmas caroling, going trick-or-treating, all these things, if you participate, you build capital, much like an investment in your community, and it makes it better for all. And so the communities that tend to thrive the most have the most people investing that social capital, people contributing and making it something that everybody wants to live in, and the things that people have in common make them happy about living in this community. But yet there is a difficult contradiction, as the book points out, between our culture expecting individualism to be separated for the average person versus community values. Because when you are an individual, as we celebrate in the United States, and social media really allows you to be an individual, to present things in such a specific way about yourself, to really, as we've discussed, manage that self-presentation online. When you are an individual, you don't necessarily have the community's interests at heart. For example, let's say that you don't have a lot of money, but your sidewalk needs repair, but you would rather put it into getting an ATV, for example. Or you would rather put it into a video game console, or you would rather just pay rent with it because you're behind on it. You're not taking care of your sidewalk, which is your individual responsibility. But that's not good for everybody on the street, especially mothers with strollers and other kinds of people who use it for walking. If your sidewalk is really messed up, it's not in the interest of the community. So there's that tension that goes on, and we can see that in groups, especially on Facebook, which I'm most familiar with people joining groups or others coming online and posting that they are trying to raise money for a cause and they want others to join because it's very important to them. Then we find out whether the individual motive of that's not really my thing versus the community motive, I should do it for the group of people in this private network, this personal network. That's where there's a tension that can come into play. When we talk about social capital, to continue on with that concept a little bit more, there are two forms of it according to the book. One is a bonding form of social capital, and that's where you have strong ties to the people on your social media platform. And that's in contrast with a bridging social capital form, which is about weak ties. So these are the people maybe that to illustrate, the weak ties might be people that you were friends with in high school because you went to high school and you haven't talked to them in a few years, and now only because of social media, or mostly because of social media, you have the chance to get in touch with them. So you make that connection, you accept their friend requests, or you follow them, they follow you, you add them to your Snapchat group, whatever it is that you do, but it's not exactly like the relationship goes deeper. It's still the same kind of, we know each other, never really got along, never really had contact with each other, but, we're friends because we come from that same time. That's a bridging form of social capital, weak ties, versus a bonding form, your mother, your father, your best friend, your boyfriend, your girlfriend, people that you live with. Those people, strong ties, that's a bonding form of social capital, both of which, again, are building this idea that there's a community on the web, there's a community in your social media of people who are giving up their own individual things to contribute to the betterment of everybody. Maybe it's just a conversation that they're having. Maybe the conversation's about politics and people are getting really down and dirty and getting really mean with each other and taking hard stances, and maybe the social capital person is the person who creates, hey, come on, we all agree on this, or we all don't agree on this, but we have one goal in mind to try and understand, et cetera, to try and create some sort of, serenity to that particular situation. The book later on in this chapter develops the idea of trust as being different for online trust. Because when we use the web, we are trusting it, are we not? Every single day. We are trusting when we go on Facebook that whatever we put, or Twitter or Instagram, post a photo, that people, if they don't have access to whatever you've given permission them to have access to, that we're trusting that's not going to be violated. And we have a general trust, as the book points out, when we go to purchase something you purchase something on Amazon, you have a trust that it's going to be delivered. You have a trust that your credit card information is not going to be stolen. You have a trust that you're not going to be violated in some way. And that's different from a very specific trust. Like when you text somebody and you say, don't tell somebody else, blah, 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 blah. Or you email and you'd say, I appreciate if you don't share this with anybody else. You're putting very specific, personal, particular trust in a person. There's two very different things online, both of which can cause a lot of anxiety, right? Especially with that personal trust part, where you share something and then you suspect that it has been shared beyond your wishes, shared with somebody else. You said something bad about somebody, and now you think that has been shared with them. The violation creates a lot of anxiety that we don't necessarily have without social media, although gossip, which is really kind of what we're talking about here, that's as old as the hills, I really have to say. The book cites a couple studies that says that the more you use social media, the more trust you have in social media. I mean, that makes sense, right? If you were violated, and you would pull back from it, one would think. So to use it more means you only have more trust in it. And so social media companies, to try and introduce a dimension that we haven't yet talked about in this class, in terms of what they're seeking to make money out of. Many of the social media companies are trying to connect you with past friends, because they know that in so doing, they are building communities. Even if it's weak tie, even if it's bridging communities, they're still building communities. And communities of people tend to act in concert. As the book points out, that we tend to trust our friends more. And so when we see our friends that are using products on various social media platforms, it has a stronger potential persuasive effect on us than if we see a commercial on television. That's the thinking behind many social media companies. Facebook, Twitter. Twitter has not yet been able to make a profit. Snapchat, I'm sure, does it. Instagram, I know, does it because it's a subsidiary of Facebook. They have the ability to sell advertising to communities of people who have like-minded interests. Just for myself, looking around, I can look for a golf club on eBay. And the next thing I know, the exact golf club I was looking for with that manufacturer is popping up on my Facebook. And that's because of the whole integrated cookie system that's on every device that you use. But the point is trust, to bring it back to that, is something that social media companies are really after. Once you trust a person who's selling something on a social media platform, you're going to be more likely to purchase whatever it is that they're selling. Now, to wrap things up, we do have some differences in the way that we are able to build our communities that we don't have when we don't have social media. Those differences, again, come back to this idea that we can really specifically manage our personal relationships, and it's those personal relationships, the democratization of them, which have led to the community. So we have all kinds of ways of controlling how and when we are able to communicate with people, including muting people, if you think about that idea. It's the idea of blocking messages, but still keeping them as your friend, and the kind of mental process you go through before you make that decision. Well, I don't want them to think this. I don't want them to think that. And so I'm just going to do this, and I hope that they don't do that. All the machinations that go along with that. It's all part of our way of controlling to a very fine T. Literally, whether we want to see something that somebody has posted or not, as we scroll through our phone, we have controls that we just didn't have before. And so, as a result, and as a transition to get ready to head to our next chapter, we are talking about a world where there are new mediated intimacies. That's a word that we've talked about very much in this class before. We've talked about it in the context of relationships, in terms of communities built on personal relationships that we have intimacies with, but those intimacies are many of those intimacies are conducted almost entirely online. And that's what we're going to go to discuss in the next chapter. In the meantime, have a great day.